Hello and welcome back to No Ballet Shoes in Syria, and we're on chapter 5. Dotty shrugged and grinned. Alas, duty calls. Nice to meet you though, Syrian girl. She paused for a second by the door, looking at Aya closely, and her expression changed suddenly. Hey, I'm dead sorry if I said the wrong thing, by the way. I do that. My mum says I speak without thinking. Aya shook her head. You didn't. Dotty Buchanan, came a voice from inside the studio again. You will please get in here. Dotty was still watching Aya with a look of concern. Come back though, won't you? Aya wanted to say something, but the door to the studio was opening, and there stood the dance mistress. Up close, Aya thought she looked even smaller, like a tiny, tough, little fairy grandmother. She was much older than Madame Belliver, but there was something about the elegance of her movement, the tilt of her chin, that reminded Aya of her old teacher. A kind of indefinable grace that shimmered all around the old lady, like fairy dust. Dotty Buchanan, what are you doing, shilly and shallying out here? And so late. Sorry, my mum was in rehearsal and then we got caught in traffic and then I met Aya. The ballet mistress glanced skirtingly in Aya's direction before tapping her watch and staring significantly at Dotty. Time, Miss Buchanan. But Aya's a refugee from Syria, Dotty explained. How cool is that, Miss Helena? Miss Helena flicked a fleeting glance in Aya's direction. This time she frowned ever so slightly. That is very cool, but I'm thinking that you are the one with a big audition coming up, Miss Buchanan. So perhaps you should spend less time chittering and more time perfecting your développés. Yes, Miss Helena, Dotty sighed, glancing apologetically at Aya, as she started to make her way into the studio. Then she stopped by the doorway. Hey, could Aya join our class? Aya felt as if a swarm of butterflies had suddenly awoken in her belly, coloured wings fluttering. I mean, look at the way she stands, Dotty was saying. It's dead obvious she's a dancer. This class is full, said Miss Helena, gently but firmly. But, Dotty cut in, the butterfly wings scattered like fallen leaves in Aya's empty belly. For some reason she felt like crying. She hadn't allowed herself to cry for weeks. But nothing, Dotty Buchanan, said Miss Helena, sharply, and she glanced at Aya again, with an odd expression in her eyes. Let us be getting to the bar. Aya blinked hard, tipped her chin up firmly. She hadn't cried since Dad, and she wouldn't let herself do it now. You will come back again, Dotty whispered, as Miss Helena hustled her into the classroom. I don't know, Aya heard herself say. I can try. Promise, said Dotty. Aya thought of all the promises she'd made, to Mama, to Musa, to Dad. Miss Helena was shooing Dotty into the room. She looked back and Aya nodded, ever so slightly. OK, I promise. Aleppo, Syria. The war came to Aleppo just after Aya's 7th birthday. Mum had made a traditional tabbouleh and an almond cake with a ballerina on the top. She'd invited all the girls from her dance class to a sleepover. The evening was mild, so Mum said they could sleep on the roof terrace under the stars. Samia was dancing around doing impressions of her favourite pop star. Nadia and Nuda were making up a routine that looked as if they were one girl dancing in front of a mirror. Kimmy was drawing pictures of ballerinas in pink and lilac and turquoise tutus. There had been music coming from the garden below and the smell of Mama cooking in the kitchen when the first explosions happened. Aya had thought there were fireworks going off in the eastern part of the city, fireworks for her birthday. But Dad had come home from the hospital early and she heard him talking to her mother in low, urgent tones in the kitchen. Protesters, shot by government troops, fighting in the old city, she heard him say. The beautiful old covered market where Mama had bought fruit and almonds for Aya's birthday cake had been damaged, bullet holes pockmarking the walls of the ancient suck. Mama gathered all the girls inside. It's not safe to sleep on the roof, she said. So they made a den out of a mattress in Aya's room and lit candles on the cake and sang happy birthday. But the evening was spoiled somehow and Aya could not sleep for a long time because of the sound of gunfire. The following day she found out that Samia's older brother Rami had been in the protest. He'd been one of the lucky ones. He came home with just scratches and a frightened look in his eyes. Others had not been so fortunate. Over the next few days, the fighting got more intense. The eastern part of the city was taken by rebels, and Aleppo felt as if it had been cut in half. Now there were soldiers patrolling the streets near Aya's home, and Dad said they were not to go to the western part of Aleppo because it was occupied by government troops. Luckily, Madame Beliver's dance class was in their quarter of the city. That was all that mattered to Aya back then. The party gifts were all packed away, and the last of the cake eaten, but the sound of the gunfire did not stop. It was surprising how quickly something like that actually started to feel normal. Chapter 6. My father is a doctor, I explained, for what felt like the millionth time. I mean, he was. This was a new caseworker, not the one they'd seen in the detention centre in Bedford. He didn't seem to have their files. They'd been lost or mislaid somewhere. Nobody seemed to know where. When they'd been moved to the centre and relocated to Manchester, and so Aya had to go over everything again. He worked in a hospital in Aleppo, but before that he was in England for 5 years in a place called Birmingham. Aya sounded out the unfamiliar name, remembering how Dad always pronounced it, with a funny nasal accent that made her laugh. He had papers from a hospital there. They said they would find him a job. Do you still have the papers? The young caseworker looked up hopefully. He was in his early 20s with a smattering of a beard growing across his face. He looked very tired. Aya shook her head. They were, she hesitated, also lost. Musa was attempting to clamber under one of the tables by the food bank, and the two elderly ladies in charge were looking very cross. Aya went to rescue him before he bashed his head or knocked something over. Enough mischief, Musa, she said, feeling really tired. Aya is trying to sort everything out. She needs you to be good, okay? The young caseworker was looking impatient as Aya returned with a wriggling Musa in her arms. Mama was fiddling with her sleeve, the way she did when she was upset or anxious. Aya leaned over and stroked her hand. Don't worry, Mama, it's going to be fine. And your initial claim for asylum was rejected because... The caseworker was asking questions again. Aya wanted to ask why they'd been moved here, why they had to go over all this stuff again. There never seemed to be time to ask anything. I don't know. They say we were entering the country illegally, said Aya. She remembered the immigration officials bundling them all into the back of a police van and taking them to the detention centre, which felt more like a prison than a place of safe haven. I think the other lady, our caseworker before, said that we'd already claimed safe haven in Turkey or Greece, I think, and so we cannot apply for asylum here. These words had become familiar to Aya now. Safe haven, asylum, refugee status, right to remain. She knew the words, even though she really didn't fully understood what they all meant. I see. The young man sifted through the papers with a frown as Musa wriggled his way off of Aya's lap again. Well, I'll see what I can do. But we hadn't, said Aya quickly as Musa tottered off in the direction of the food bank again. You see, they interviewed my mother when we first arrived at the detention centre 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? Had they only been in England for less than a month? But she wasn't well, and her English. She wanted to explain about how things had been after Dad, about the refugee camp, and Mama being unwell. Although the caseworker at the detention centre had insisted on interviewing her without Aya, how Mama had probably not understood a word they were asking her. But the young man had already started putting away the papers in the folder. He didn't seem like listening anymore. Musa was being shooed away from the pile of tins and packages by the two fierce-looking ladies who were tutting crossly. I understand. He removed his glasses and rubbed his temples, and Aya thought he didn't look as if he understood at all. But... we can apply again. We can appeal, said Aya. The other caseworker said we could appeal. I'll look into it, said the tired young man, scribbling something on a piece of paper. Now I must see the next person. Musa had fallen over and bumped his head. He was crying now in a high-pitched wail that made Aya feel suddenly desperate. They won't send us back, will they? The caseworker was beckoning to the next family, and Aya could feel panic rising. She had waited so long to talk to him, and there were so many things she still needed to ask. Aya, Aya! Musa's sobs rose high in the hot air. They can't, can they? Aya demanded. They can't send us back to Aleppo. She remembered what Mr. Abdul had called them, floating people. Sometimes it had felt like there were pieces of driftwood, forever on the move, on the ebb and flow of the tide, with no choice where they were taken. always at the mercy of others. I will do my best. And then the caseworker was opening the next file, and Musa was red-faced and whimpering in the arms of one of the food bank ladies, who was tutting crossly and saying something about keeping children under control. He reached out his little fingers towards Aya and murmured, "Dada, want Dada." "Me too, Moose," said Aya, and stretched out a finger to Moose's outstretched palm and took his tiny, sticky hand in her own. "Me too." Okay, that's the end of chapter 6. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.